This is a story with a lot of pride regarding South Bend. When you think of watches, places like Geneva, Switzerland or Paris, France often come to mind.
Yeah, but it turns out that in the beginning of the 1900s, South Bend, our home, had its own major brand of watches. In this special report, we give you the history of the South Bend Watch Company.
So that's an open face. If it ends with an odd number, it's an open face. If it ends with an even number, it's a Hunter style.
When you think of manufacturing in South Bend, watches may not be the first thing that comes to mind. But in the early 20th century, South Bend was home to the South Bend Watch Company, a well-known manufacturer of pocket watches. Bill Stockton is a local historian and collector of the South Bend Watch Company.
And then I saw something about South Bend Watch Company. I thought, well, I never heard of that. I grew up around here. Why didn't I know about that? Well, because they kind of did away with everything.
The origins of the South Bend Watch Company did not start in South Bend, but rather in Ohio.
It started out, there was a Columbus Watch Company in Columbus, Ohio. And they started in the 1870s. They started production, though, actually in Columbus and built the factory building and then moved everything here.
Once the company was bought and moved to South Bend, the South Bend Watch Company began production of high-end men's and women's pocket watches in 1903. The Studebaker family was involved with the company and even lent their name to some watches. When collecting South Bend watches, there is a big difference between a Studebaker watch and the Studebaker watch.
There's two levels. There's the Studebaker and just Studebaker. Is the Studebaker watch. So this is one of the early ones. I don't remember the exact year, but this was probably made around 1908. And they also lent their name to the company and let them put Studebaker on the watch movements. And they put the Studebaker in there, were the grades. And Studebaker, of course, had a huge reputation for quality. Putting their name on a product was quite an endorsement.
The watch company faced some setbacks in the late teens and then in the 20s. Ultimately, the stock market crash of 1929 was the final nail in the coffin.
Blunder's made is kind of like Studebaker Corporation. You read about they were having all kinds of financial problems, but they still paid dividends to the stockholders. Well, the watch company did the same thing. Thanksgiving Day of 29, they sent their workers home and said that they would open at the beginning of the year. That didn't happen.
The South Bend Watch Company was in business from 1903 till 1929. And in that 26-year run, they produced around 880,000 watches and provided an estimated $20 million in wages. It turns out Bill wasn't the only one who was unaware of the South Bend Watch Company. Once John Nunemaker found out about the history, he dove in head first.
And he was like, well, you know, South Bend had a watch company. And so I was like, no, I didn't know that. This one's also similar, but in silver. So I've tried to track those down a little bit by taking, popping the back and looking at it and stuff.
As a hobby, John takes the old South Bend pocket watches and converts them into wearable wrist watches. He describes his simple process.
So it's pop those two screws and then pull the stem, and the pocket watch, you literally have to be careful, it'll just fall right out.
The idea of converting pocket watches into wrist watches is not a new idea.
Well, they call it a marriage watch in like Eastern Europe. So there's a lot of watchmakers there, and they basically take pocket watches and convert them to wrist watches. A very common thing.
John also catalogs each watch he acquires and sells, so every watch can have its own story and can help in the historical preservation of the South Bend Watch Company.
Catalog, because I love the historical aspect of, like, these are all the watches that I touched at some point.
Today, the South Bend Watch Company is mostly forgotten. However, the location of the factory building is still well known, even to this day. Factories come, factories go, but the locations, they stay the same. For the South Bend Watch Company, it has actually changed over the years. IUSB actually stands on the location where the original watch factory once stood. Unfortunately, in July of 1957, the old building burned down as they were scrapping it out and ready for it to sail. Right here on Mishawaka Avenue, hundreds of people gathered to watch the factory burn down in a glorious fashion. It was once said that the fire was so hot and so bright that you could see the flames from over 4 miles away. It has been over 95 years since the South Bend Watch Company went out of business. Over 65 years since the factory building burnt down and was demolished. But people like Bill and John are both keeping the memory and history alive of one of the great titans of industry of South Bend, Indiana. And if you would like to learn more about the South Bend Watch Company, you can go ahead and go over to our website, WNDU.com, When South Bend Kept Time, and there is an extended story on there. It's actually right around 8 minutes long with a whole bunch more goodies in there. But the South Bend Watch Company closed in 1929. When all was said and done, the company produced just shy of 1 million watches and provided a huge economic growth to here in South Bend. All those watchmakers, they're actually out in Ohio. They brought everybody over and still paid them what they were due. They're a very, very cool company, and it's a very story if you want to get lost in a little bit of local history. It was
really
fun.
Interesting, Jack. I really enjoyed that. I'm curious. I was asked. We were talking about during the break about how many watches are left from the original South Bend Watch Company.
You can still find. There's about 100, 150 that are on eBay right now that you can buy, and depending on the specific grade on it, if it was a railroad watch, depending on the size of it, a women's watch or a men's watch or a banker's watch or something like that, it'll fluctuate in prices. Right now, you could buy a broken South Bend watch. I don't know if you would want to do that, but you could buy one for right around $100. You can get one that's running probably as cheap as $200 to $250, and they can go upwards of right around $1,500.
So people here in South Bend could be opening one this Christmas.
I would hope so. I would hope so. They're pretty cool.
Really good work. Thank you, Jack.